It's Friday, December 20th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast presented by Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. And it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that is Andy Behrens. Andy, what's going on, big dog?
Oh, it is a hell of a week. We got a pretty good slate ahead of us. I'm anxious because we got, obviously, the fantasy semifinals are upon us. All of the wrong teams for me made it through. My favorite fantasy teams, with maybe one exception, eliminated. All the wrong teams made it through. So I don't know how many I'm actually going to get to championship week. It was kind of a bloodbath last week for me.
Interesting. Yeah, I've got a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs teams that made it through, which I feel great about that. It's so funny too. Sometimes like the player that kind of makes your season, and I'm absolutely cursing Jahmyr Gibbs by saying this, and the fact that like Dalton and I said at the beginning of the week that he's definitely the consensus running back one now. No Dave Montgomery through the rest of the fantasy season, whatever. He's screwed. Sorry about that, folks. He's absolutely screwed this week and next if you happen to survive it. But it's funny, like sometimes the player that might end up making your season is a guy that like and like actively go into any draft being like, I've got to get Jahmyr Gibbs. It was more like, all right, all these freak shows are drafting wide receivers. I'm just kind of like end of the first round, top of the second. I'll take a Jahmyr Gibbs here. I'll go with a little Jahmyr Gibbs action, and I'm hoping that comes through. But the real pressing matter here, Andy Behrens, is that I don't know about you. I don't know what Christmas holiday miracles you are just absolutely wishing for, but I will say it for probably the 10th time in the last couple of weeks that whatever holiday figure I need to pray to or like just wish upon that George Pickens' hamstring can be okay. It's like all I need in the world is for George Pickens to be a player that I was hard on after his rookie year too, by the way. He now holds the fate of my fantasy season in his hands.
Yeah, we're gonna be talking about a situation today that I absolutely need to right itself. That has been a little bit off all year. So, yeah, I'm rooting for some pretty unlikely outcomes this week, and I'm trying to reattach myself to some fantasy teams that I had previously written off. Like you just get rosters that you, over the course of a season, you really begin to actively dislike. And those are the teams that have made it through for me. So I just have, I have some weird rooting arrangements this week.
Oh, God, that is absolutely beautiful. And I kind of love to hear that you've put yourself in that position. That's pretty sweet. Speaking of the holidays, speaking of miracles, and speaking of Andy Behrens' feelings, Andy has been in the festive mood for weeks. You can see that if you're watching on YouTube. You've been seeing it in his background for quite some time. You can also see here on YouTube, we have gone full Clark Griswold with our graphics here. By the way, just say this, Christmas Vacation, top 3 Christmas movie for me. Maybe top 2, maybe top 1. I don't want to hear any arguments about it. I don't know if you have arguments about it, Behrens. I'll listen to your arguments. The people out there, I'm sorry. I appreciate you listening to the podcast. Thank you for the support. I will not be hearing any arguments about Christmas Vacation, which is an absolutely iconic piece of holiday cinema. But anyways, so we went full Griswold with the graphics here. This means that the holidays are nearly here. And with that in mind, I do just want to unveil our unique pod schedule for next week. We know it's week 17. Your fantasy football championships are on the line here. And obviously, I'm sure people have been listening to me on the pod all week saying, oh, the last day to dump Wednesday, the last fantasy film room. Like, hey, yo, Harmon, fantasy championships, what are we talking about here? You can't just like, we're not ending the show week 16. We're not. We're going to be having shows next week, but they're going to be strictly designed to just talk about the damn games and also, get some time off for you people and your families out there. On Monday, Andy and I are going to have our usual show. We're going to recap all the action from Week 16's Sunday slate as we usually do. That program will be basically exactly what you expect. On Tuesday, the very merry Dalton Del Don will join me for a special edition of the pod where we're going to just dial in and preview the Christmas Day slate and Thursday Night Football. And then on Friday, the red-nosed fantasy analyst himself, Andy Behrens, will be back right here to preview all the rest of Week Sunday's action. Saturday football, Sunday football, Monday football. We are going to leave no stone unturned to get you ready for those fantasy championships, while, again, also making sure that you put football and fantasy aside for just a quick moment to pay attention to your loved ones out there?
I gotta say, I kind of like that there's football basically every day for the next, I don't even know how long, like month. It's a couple of weeks. It's kind of fun. We can all do without some, multiple Christmas Day games, but I like this Saturday action.
Yeah. I'll try to play that sound clip for my wife and maybe convince her. See, it's fun. Football on every day during the holidays.
Yeah.
Me up here in the office. You down there, us not spending time together. Isn't that fun? It could be fun. Andy says, sure. Andy says it's fun. Anyways, with that, let's get on to this particular show here. And we're going to do what we do every single Friday. Andy joins us for his 3 burning fantasy questions he wants answered, and then the 3 matchups he says deserve your attention. Then Tera Roberts joins me in the back half of the show to identify her make or break players for the week. We finish it up with our keys to winning. You know the deal. Andy, let's go through your 3 burning fantasy questions that you want answered. What's the first one?
Yeah, the first one's pretty obvious, and I realize that I believe you've already talked this situation through with Nate Tice, who much more informed than a mere Andy Behrens. But we got to talk about Michael Penix. It just cannot be worse than what we've seen from the Falcons offense over the last 5 weeks, right? We've all been discussing this, or most people have been discussing this, as if it is just entirely about the decline of Kirk Cousins, which has been pretty obvious, and hopefully he can pull out of this nosedive maybe in the offseason, but velocity not there, mobility not there. He's just a beat behind right now. And they did need to make a change. I think that was pretty clear. Once you start play calling around the limitations of the quarterback, man, and you have another option on the roster, you probably got to go to it. But I do think that at some level, and we haven't seen Penix, so nobody really knows. But at some level, this is also an endorsement of what the team has seen from Penix. So maybe there's a real reason to feel optimistic about it. I'm getting actually a lot of questions, a lot of sit-start questions about whether people should plug him into lineups. And I don't think it's crazy. He's the guy who gets to throw to Drake London and Darnell Mooney and Bijan Robinson, and it's a good environment. And he's facing a Giants defense that is vulnerable. They'll put some heat on you. Like, they're up there in terms of the overall sack leaders on the season, but they've also given up a zillion touchdown passes. Like, there's going to be opportunities here. It's a friendly matchup. Also, people know this about Penix, but he's 24 and like almost 25. He's like half a year younger than Trevor Lawrence. He's not, this is not like a purely developmental quarterback prospect who's years away. This is somebody who was really good in college over multiple seasons. Got a huge arm. Like all the velocity worries that we've had with Kirk Cousins recently, that goes out the window. He's got a big arm. He's fun. He's not the kind of dual threat guy that you can just plug in sight unseen and feel pretty confident is going to give you 15 or 16 points. But man, he was just a great passer at the college level, and I'm pretty excited to see what we get moving forward. This at some level, it also feels like a bold call by the coaching staff, but also it pretty much had to happen.
Yeah, if Kirk wasn't legitimately, you take out the 2 Tampa Bay games, the worst quarterback in the league, it would be seen as more bold. Like, wow, you guys are in the thick of a playoff race and you're benching a proven veteran for a sight unseen rookie. Couple things to go on here. You mentioned this must be an endorsement of Penix in some way. I mean, shoot, Nate brought this up yesterday, and because this feels like it happened 1,000 years ago, I forgot about it. But remember when in the preseason, the Falcons were just like, yeah, no, we've seen enough of Penix. Like, we don't need to play him again in the preseason. That felt weird because at the time it was like, wait, isn't the whole plan here like you're not going to see Penix again until, I don't know, 2026? At the earliest, because Kirk is going to be just taking you to the postseason this year and giving you another good year in 2025. And when you want to see Penix, I think in hindsight, it was a pretty big alarm bell of what they were seeing from Kirk. I mean, the fact that Michael Penix is on this roster was an alarm bell of what they were, maybe hedging their bets against Kirk Cousins. But still, to say that, to be like, we don't need to see him again in the preseason is still also an endorsement. To start him right now when they are still in the thick of a playoff race is still an endorsement. So I like you framing it that way. And your point about his age is a good one too, because a big reason that I think Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix have been able to kind of thrive as rookies is that these guys have seen a lot of football. They've played a lot of football. They're like older quarterback prospects that have they've got a lot of reps under their belt.
Mm-hmm.
And, neither of those guys is perfect. They're also, they're running offenses that are tailored a little bit to their skill sets. And I'm interested to see what this offense looks like tailored to Penix's skill set, which is very different than those two guys. But still, again, I think the reason they were able to be day one starters and, by and large have very positive rookie seasons is because they've had a lot of experience under their belt, kind of in kind of contrast to a Caleb Williams and a little bit to Drake May too, but Drake May's played pretty well for the Patriots as well.
Yeah, I'm interested to see, and it's it's an unknown. I can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like, but interested to see exactly what the shape of the passing game is going to be, right? If we're calling plays that look exactly like the Kirk Cousins offense, or if we're doing some new things. I would hope that we do some new things, right? You have enormously talented pass catchers here, and this feels like, again, like one touchdown pass over 5 weeks. That's crazy. That's what we've been through here, and somehow like Drake London has survived it. You probably got through last week because he has that one touchdown. You probably got through the playoff matchup last week with Drake
Thanks
London.
To that,
which is just an absolute squeaker. And now you can feel, I don't know, I feel like you can feel really bullish. It's going to matter a whole lot what we see over these next couple games. But I think he's actually I don't even want to give like the hedgy response of like, oh yeah, he's playable in Superflex. Well, no, everybody's playable in Superflex, right? I think he's somebody who it's not going to shock me if he sneaks into the top 12 in one of these weeks with considering the quality of weapons that he has at his disposal.
I mean, just the fact that I also think it can't be understated what a potential boost this is for the run game too. I mean, Bijan Robinson is running back 7 in points per game, or expected points per game, the last like since week 10. He's running back 7, and he's produced pretty much like right at that level. And this is an offense that scored 15 points against the Raiders, and it was a struggle to score 15 points against the Raiders. Like the fact that the quarterback has one touchdown pass over this last stretch, and the running back is still a set it and forget it, top 5 fantasy back. It's a big deal to then the fact that we're going to potentially like get any sort of boost. And because I would have about a week ago, I probably would have said, hey, this is really some introducing some volatility. It's a rookie quarterback, this, that, and the other. But just what we've gotten from Kirk at this point, the bar is literally at the floor. And I think Penix, he can either meet or clear that bar. We shall see.
Yeah, I fully agree with it. They need to do it. A couple weeks ago, I would have told you, I think I said on this show, I can't really imagine them making the move until they are officially eliminated from playoff contention. But man, after that Raiders game, it just had to happen.
So yeah, I mean, last few things definitely, again, reiterate from yesterday. London, you're starting. Mooney is probably a little bit more boom bust, but I think is back on like the wide receiver 2-3 radar, someone that you can play after putting up a stone 0 last week. Okay, let's get to your second burning question for this week.
Yeah, it's purely selfish because this is not a guy that you would bench, but it is about Trey McBride. Obviously, McBride has just the absolute craziest touchdown drought that any of us have seen, right? Like this kind of blows the Deontay Johnson thing out of the water. It's wild. 116 targets, I want to say, on the season, 89 catches, no receiving scores. Crazy. They fed him that stupid shovel pass last week to try to get him in the end zone. It works for literally every other team. It didn't work for the Cardinals. It is absolutely wild what he's going through. But Trey McBride this week faces a Carolina defense that has allowed 11 touchdowns to opposing tight ends this year. And some of the grimiest, ickiest tight ends in the league have scored against them. We got 2 from Noah Gray. We got 2 for Foster Moreau. Like you don't have to be a star to find the end zone against the Panthers. So something's got to give here, I think. And I hope we get the positive regression from Trey McBride. The one team that I have, the one fantasy team that I have that I actually like that is still going in the playoffs, I need a big game from Trey McBride so bad. I need not just the usual, like, that's the wild thing is like Trey McBride has 4 straight games with double-digit targets. He's got a couple of like 12 catch games in there. For him to not find the end zone, just absolutely wild. I need all of that positive regression to hit this week. I need him to finish week 16 with the touchdown total that he should have based on the volume that he's seen so far. I need like that Alvin Kamara style, like 5-6 touchdown game out of Trey McBride. Let's make it happen.
I like that you frame this Trey McBride season as one of the like more mystifying zero touchdown seasons, because the two most famous ones in recent memory were like Jacoby Myers' touchdown drought. Okay, well, I love Jacoby Myers, but he's a undrafted wide receiver in his second season on the Cam Newton 2020 Panthers. Like, all right, I'm not too shocked that he got a lot of targets and not a lot of touchdowns. Deontay Johnson's recently with the 2022 Steelers. Number one, he's Deontay Johnson. He's a good player, but he's a certifiably weird player. There's no doubt about that. And he was, again, this was the Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett 2022 Steelers team. Like, okay, the number one receiver just accidentally didn't score a touchdown. Sure. This is I said Cam's Panthers teams. I meant the Patriots teams. Anyways, you get it. The 2020 Patriots teams with Cam freaking Newton. I wonder why I skipped over that in my brain. But this is Trey McBride. Like, he's having a great season. It's not like he's having a great year. And the offense, I know we've been frustrated by it in Arizona. Like, it's been a little irritating from a fantasy perspective. This is one of the bigger irritations, but it's not a bad offense by any means. So yeah, I like that you at least frame it that way, and that it is more mystifying than some of these others in recent memory.
It is just absolutely incredibly mystifying. It is you just don't see volume like this from and we're not talking about like an elite upper tier NFL offense necessarily, but they're good. And of late, they're actually trying to get him in the end zone. They've been proactive about ending this weird drought. Part of me, though, thinks, man, this is the Panthers, and this could just be a 4-touchdown game from James Conner. This could be all James Conner all afternoon, and he could be the RB1, and I don't get what I need out of Trey McBride. But, man, I would like to see it change. The other wild thing about McBride, and this is a little bit of an indictment of the tight end position, but this also tells you how good he's been basically between the 1-yard lines. He's the tight end 3 on the season and does not have a receiving touchdown. That's crazy.
No. Kyler Murray has talked about, like, I think he said this week, like, 85 is getting in the end zone. Trey McBride's going to get in the end zone. And yeah, I mean, even like 11.6 points per game for Trey McBride, 11.9 points per game is Brock Bowers, the actual tight end, like the actual tight end one. So it's not as if it's like, and Bowers has 4 touchdowns. So it's just, he's playing great. He's playing great. It's so bizarre just to look at where he's at and the season he's having. Shoot, even go back to last year. Your guy, Sam Laporta, was the tight end 1 on the back of 10 touchdowns, 11.5 points per game. Like,
that's how tight ends usually get home in fantasy, right? We've seen all kinds of seasons where somebody gets like 85 targets and they just kind of, they fall into 8 or 9 touchdowns and they're a top 5 tight end easily.
Instead, this guy's fallen his way into 1,116 targets, or excuse me, 116 targets and not scored a touchdown, and is still having a better season on a points per game basis than Sam Laporta last year, who scored 10 times. So yeah, McBride has been certifiably awesome, and like, obviously he has some rushing touchdowns too. It is worth noting he does have a couple of rushing touchdowns, but receiving touchdowns still. The fact that you have highlighted these kind of guys like Noah Gray, Foster Moreau, 11 total touchdowns have been scored against the Panthers via the tight end position. The fact that Kyler Murray is talking about, getting him in the end zone. Also, Kyler Murray is, I don't know if you saw this, they asked him, like, hey, have you played in, like, how do you feel about playing in the cold? He's like, I played in cold weather games before. I'm not worried about it. He said, how cold is it supposed to be? And they said 35 degrees. He goes, oh. All of that combined makes me think, like, it's not gonna happen. James Conner, finally he's gonna find the end zone 3 times. Nothing for Trey McBride.
Who are these people who can't handle 35-degree weather? Like, that's beautiful football weather. That is endlessly frustrating to me.
Where's Kyler Murray from? He's got to be from, I think he's Texas. I mean, he's from Texas. Yeah. From Texas. Listen. I lived in California I lived in LA for almost 10 years. 35 is not that
kind of
bad.
resets
Okay.
you, huh?
It reset. Oh yeah, it resets you. He's gone from Texas to. I mean, Oklahoma can get a little cold. Now he's been in Arizona. I don't know. Phoenix. It's hot there. I don't know. Anyways, yeah, we should be able to handle that. From one Cardinal to a former Cardinal, give us your third burning fantasy question here.
Yeah, I'm interested to talk this situation out with you as a receiving specialist, Matt Harmon. My third burning question is how big an impact Hollywood Brown can have on the Chiefs' offense and how quickly it can happen. I am particularly interested in Brown as a vertical option for that team because, and it feels wild because when we think of Patrick Mahomes, we think of all the early career, like crazy success with Tyreek Hill, a lot of that on deep balls. Like he came into the league and every year on, throws of 20 plus yards, he'd have like 12, 13 touchdowns, couple of interceptions, crazy passer rating, a lot of throws. This year, he is 11 for 40 on throws traveling 20 plus yards downfield. He has 4 touchdowns, which is pretty good by his recent standards, and 4 interceptions. Last year, he was much worse. He threw 1 touchdown pass on those deep throws and like 6 picks. So it just really hasn't been there. And, people can think back to the deep shots that he's taken to Justin Watson and these, some of these gadgety return specialists and guys who are not just fully accredited receivers like Hollywood Brown is. Brown has a 90 catch, 1,000-yard season on his NFL resume. And he's been really good in this league. He's a separator. He can do more than simply streak downfield, but I am interested to see if the vertical, passing game opens up. Also, like a reason to be a little bit more bullish on Brown, I think, is that he is coming off injury, but also it's a shoulder injury. It's not like this was, a long knee injury, or he's returning from a high ankle sprain, or it's something where we would expect it to sap his explosiveness. I feel like if he's right, he can come back and we don't have to limit his snaps too much, and it can just be the old Hollywood Brown and we can feel good about it.
Yeah, so while you were talking, I was making sure to take off my troll hat and put on my receiving specialist hat, though. So thank you for hey, listen, you got to be able to do multiple things. You got to play multiple roles. All right, people.
Got to be a generalist.
Yeah, you got to be able to do multiple things. Okay, fill different roles for your team here. So yeah, I'm glad you kind of queued me up to do that. And I think it's interesting because you talk about like him as the sort of the vertical option of this offense. And honestly, really where I'm more interested in Hollywood Brown is if he can be active. Like, can he activate that offense in the intermediate area of the field? It's obviously worth noting that we don't know right now if Patrick Mahomes is going to play in this game. He has gotten full participation in practice on Saturday, or the game is on Saturday, leading up to the Saturday game. He's been getting in full practices, which kind of interesting considering how he how it looked, coming off of that, coming off the field on Sunday. But we've seen this stuff from Mahomes before where it looks like, oh, this is going to be a devastating injury, and he just goes out and plays. So credit to him for that. So I would assume Mahomes is going to end up playing in this game on Saturday. When we look at this, just kind of like Marquise Brown in his best seasons, in my opinion, and like last year with the Cardinals, weirdly, he kind of ran the route tree that I wish like Marvin Harrison Jr. was running more often with the Arizona Cardinals as their X receiver. He ran a lot of slants, like 24% slant routes and reception perceptions, 13.4% dig routes, 17% like curl routes, like kind of in that in-breaking intermediate area. And that's really where I think they need kind of somebody with some separation ability to run like those intermediate routes. And, certainly he can obviously get you downfield. I agree with you. He's always been a really good separator against zone coverage in particular. His 2022 season, because he was kind of banged up in 23. He had like 81st percentile success rate versus zone, and he's like always been in that bucket. The Chiefs face more man coverage than other teams, so that is worth noting. Like he's always been, just because of his size, he's never been the best man coverage separator, but you're still going to get zone on like 60+% of your snaps. So he can make some big plays for this team. And I liked the signing a lot. And I just think he was easy to forget about because it's been so long since we've kind of considered him.
Yeah, I liked the signing a ton at the time. Mahomes seemed enthusiastic about it at the time. It seems like a nice pairing of talents here. I should also say, and I don't know what Brown's return does to this. It probably takes a chunk out of it, but like Xavier Worthy is actually one of the most targeted receivers in football over the last 4 weeks, which is kind of wild. He's seen 30 targets over his last 4 games. I imagine some of that workload goes to Hollywood Brown. Like there's I don't know. The other thing about Xavier Worthy being that targeted is it hasn't resulted in much of anything, right? It's still the streak of like 40-yard games is basically what we're getting. So you give some of those opportunities to Brown, which are not, like a lot of what we're seeing from Xavier Worthy. These are not like deep down field shots. So if that work just simply shifts to Hollywood, man, that could mean big things for the offense.
Yeah, and I'll give Xavier Worthy some credit because I've been hard on him this year too, that I think he's played better in isolation like the last month or so when he's been getting these targets. They've been trying to get him a little more activated. So just getting another body in here for people to think about and consider should be a big deal. And I'm definitely interested to see like what is Marquise Brown's playing time coming out of this game, because like you mentioned, it's not as if he's coming off like an ACL tear or something like that. So certainly something to monitor there. Marquise Brown's only rostered in 27% of Yahoo leagues. I don't know that anything would really happen, Andy, like in this game that would make me think like, oh, he becomes an instant starting receiver in your fantasy championships necessarily, but could just again make the offense overall better.
I will just say there's a somewhat random dude at the end of virtually every fantasy season who just goes supernova in the fantasy playoffs, right? And Hollywood Brown wouldn't be the most random guy because he's actually been a star in the league. So we're not talking, this isn't like a Patrick Jeffers, Brashad Perriman sort of situation. This is a verifiably good player. But he's attached to the right quarterback. They've got some matchups that aren't total stay away spots. Like he's certainly worth adding, if only to keep away from an opponent, right? Like I think he's that good, and his situation is good enough too. I actually think his playing time situation is one of the most interesting questions this week as well, because again, I don't see why you'd limit his snaps coming off that particular injury, but maybe they will.
Yeah, it should be interesting to watch, and we will get an Island game on Saturday to watch it. All right, with that, let's take our first break. When we come back, Andy has 3 matchups that he says deserve your attention right after this.
Introducing Daily Draw, the latest free-to-play game from Yahoo Sports. Daily Draw gives you a pack of 6 prediction cards every day based on the day's biggest sporting event. Download or update the Yahoo Sports app on the Apple App Store or Google Play and join the action with Daily Draw today.
All right, Andy, we're back. Let's talk through 3 matchups that you, Mr. Andy Behrens, say deserve, the people should be paying attention to these, okay? These games deserve it. All right, let's talk through the first one here, Eagles at Commanders.
Yeah, this was obviously an easy one to flag. It matters certainly in the division. It matters in terms of playoff positioning. Eagles are coming off a get-right game against a very legitimate opponent, right? Like everything we saw last week was really good to see. Passing game got right. Everybody seemed happy. The Commanders are coming off a more complicated game because they won. Very narrow win, and the Saints nearly came back on their ass, right? Like they had a shot. They had a 2-point conversion attempt that actually hit the intended receiver in both hands. The Commanders win that game, but that was highly losable. And it seemed going in like it was one of the biggest mismatches of the week. So the Commanders are maybe not on all cylinders right now, and the Eagles, again, they're coming off a game where the biggest open question, it felt like it kind of got right. I think that passing game is still, it's going to be an open question throughout the playoffs, and it's very good. Can it get past the Lions? Is it that good? Is it good enough to, put up 40 in a matchup where you really have to deep in the postseason? We'll see. But obviously some great talents there. There was a lot of noise about AJ Brown. Obviously, I thought Devontae Smith was great. So they got both things working. Running game we know is good. Hopefully Saquon Barkley. Hopefully there's no injury there. He missed a little bit of time last week, but these are 2 fun teams. If I were a Washington fan, I would be deeply concerned about last week's game.
Yes, that's a great point about Washington's offense, and just offense, whatever, just the overall team, and that they allowed that Saints team to hang around coming off a bye. Pretty concerning stuff. For the Eagles offense, I talked about it a little bit on Football 301 that like that game actually really didn't move the needle for me that much from like the Eagles passing offense. Number one, because like, yeah, they have great players. Like you should be able to activate your great players, but also that particular defense in Pittsburgh profiles as the exact type of defense that even if it's a great unit, the Eagles under Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, that pairing, they've always crushed. It's a lot of man coverage. It's a lot of single high. And like, yeah, we know that you can beat up on those type of defense. I'm more curious if you can beat up on like a Vikings defense, a lot of zones, the complicated blitz patterns, 2 high safeties, things like that. This Washington team is 7th in terms of man coverage on late downs, and they give up the second most fantasy points per drop back in man coverage on late downs, according to fantasy points data. So this profiles as another team that the Philadelphia Eagles should be able to have their way with stylistically. I know Marshall Lattimore's back. Maybe that changes some of the numbers, or he's actually playing for this team now. Maybe that changes some of the numbers as things go on here. But yeah, I mean, when they play single high, they're also one of the top 10 most generous teams to opposing passing offenses as well. So this should be another good game. Like I think if you're trying to play Devontae Smith in this game, some of those data points can kind of talk you into that. Yeah. I am more curious what you think about on this Washington side of things here, because obviously the last time we saw Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin particularly go against this excellent Eagles defense, it was one of their worst outings of the season.
Yeah, and we talked about it weeks ago. It's not like Washington wasn't active at the trade deadline, but the failure to add like a difference maker as a secondary receiver, it's really going to come back to haunt him, because now Noah Brown was playing very well. Now he's done for the year. We've got Zach Ertz injured. There's just not another guy that you worry about. And their run game can be really potent, and Daniels himself is really good. But at some point, you gotta get that second option, because Terry McLaurin, as great as he's played, and he's been outstanding. He's been outstanding on some short stuff, deep stuff, all of it. Like really good player. There's nobody else like him in that receiving room. And some of the things that were kind of sort of working early in the year just aren't even going to be there now. So I don't like, this is actually a game where I think it's really meaningful. I'm struggling to talk myself into exactly how Washington can make this work. Cause I just, I think the world of Philadelphia on both sides of the ball. That's a really good team.
It's a great team. I will just note, kind of, in terms of what we saw last week for the Philadelphia Eagles, or excuse me, for the Washington Commanders, like they did do like a really good job moving Terry McLaurin around. Typically what we've said all year is like you're seeing Terry line up on the left side of the field, and like that's that. And they didn't do anything. But like last week against the Saints, almost all of his production came on the offensive right side of the field, which will put him more in terms of like Darius Slay than it will Quinyon Mitchell if they do that in this game, because these guys mostly just play sides. Slay, according to PFF, left side of the field, defensive left side of the field, 93%. So that would be the offensive right. And then Quinyon Mitchell, defensive right, offensive left, 95%. Like these guys don't really switch sides. They don't really have Mitchell shadow players or whatever. I wonder if we see something different from Cliff here, where it's like, okay, great. We did the left side of the stuff with Terry McLaurin last time these two teams played. We saw how it went. Quinyon Mitchell won that matchup for sure. Maybe this time we see a little bit something different. At least as somebody that's counting on Terry McLaurin in a fantasy league, that's what I'm telling myself. Unless you got anything else on this game, we can move to the next one.
No, yeah, next one's fun too.
Yes, next one is extremely fun. Vikings at Seahawks. Sounds like we're going to get Geno Smith in this game. He's at least participating in practice. Thank God. Okay, because this becomes a lot less fun if Sam Howell is playing for the Minnesota Vikings, or excuse me, playing against the Minnesota Vikings for the Seahawks.
Although you'd be looking at an all-time defensive performance, perhaps, and making Minnesota like one of the most obvious defensive starts in the
league winner. We BS about league winner at all these differences. Like, oh yeah, Kendra Miller, that league winner. Yeah, Isaac Guerrero, league winner. All these guys, league winners. The Vikings defense might win you leagues if Sam Howell starts in this game.
Yeah, that would be 8 sacks and like 3 or 4 turnovers and a really good shot at a defensive touchdown. Probably not going to happen though, because it seems like Geno Smith is going to be able to go. We have the ongoing injury question with Kenneth Walker. Man, the Vikings are rolling now. Like for a little while, like they have this win streak going. They've won 7 straight. They weren't all like blowouts, but these last 2 games have been decisive wins, right? Like they more than ever at any point this season, they now really look like a dangerous team. Like, given where the Lions are in terms of health, and you look at the top of the NFC and it's really good. Obviously, Philadelphia is great, but man, the Vikings look like they could go like shot for shot with absolutely anyone right now, playing really well. And then we also have the question of whether they're going to be the second NFC North team in as many weeks to just roll into Seattle and just absolutely punish the Seahawks, because they're coming off a game that wasn't particularly competitive, and obviously Geno got dinged. But they did very little offensively against the Packers. And, the Vikings, we've talked about it throughout the season. They're one of those fun defenses that is sort of geared toward, let's get sacks, let's get takeaways, let's get splash plays. You'll probably put up some yards against us, but eventually, like we're going to make decisive plays defensively. And I don't know. I've seen the Bears try to do it twice and they haven't done it. Like, I don't know how you really stop that passing game when everybody's healthy.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. And for all of the stuff I just said about Sam Howell, like, let's be real here. You're not exactly like Seattle's pass blocking is still an issue. The fact that they've lost another offensive lineman on the interior is an issue, even if Geno Smith plays in this game, especially if it's not a fully healthy Geno Smith. So I definitely think Seattle's potentially like in trouble here, regardless from an NFL standpoint. But this game does profile as a very fun fantasy back and forth. Any like, JSN, Jordan Addison, maybe some of these like non-obvious. I mean, like the way JSN's played for a long stretch of time, I think maybe he's a little obvious, but like maybe DK Metcalf, like anybody stand out from a matchup perspective to you here? Yeah.
Metcalf might be the toughest one, because we have so many recent games in which Jordan Addison has gone off, and you can certainly tell yourself a convincing story about what the best possible Jordan Addison week looks like, and you win, if you get it. So like I always tend to start those guys, even though he's a secondary option. Obviously, you know what to do with Justin Jefferson. JSN has, at this point, I think, emerged as somebody that he's a top 10 fantasy receiver on the season. He's been really great. The volume is there each week. It sure would be nice to, as an impartial observer of this game without a particular rooting interest, although I do think I have DK going somewhere, like it would be nice to see DK Metcalf have a DK Metcalf game again at some point. He's been playing through some stuff this year, and you always want to remember that, remind people of it. He's not like, I don't think he's like a declining player. He enters every week basically with multiple injury notes, a lot of limited practices, a lot of DNPs. So he is clearly playing through some stuff, but it hasn't been great, and it has not been a particularly noisy season. And it looked early on like, we had by early on, I mean like the first 4 weeks, 6 weeks of the year, it looked like we could be in for an incredible DK Metcalf campaign. He had some missed opportunities early in the year, right, where it's like a toe out of bounds, a little bit of a bobble here, bobble there. It should have been a great DK Metcalf season in process, and then the injuries really mucked it up.
Yeah, the injuries really did. And I do think the emergence of JSN also kind of really changed things here, of course. Since week 10 against 2 high defenses, according to fantasy points data, this is obviously one of the more 2 high heavy teams, if not the most, in Minnesota. 2.4 yards per route run for JSN, 1.06 for DK Metcalf.
Ouch.
So, yeah, I mean, it's they don't typically try to throw too much downfield stuff like the usual DK downfield stuff against these 2 high looks. They're probably more like, let's get the ball to JSN, especially from a pressure perspective. So I don't know what the JSN catch prop is in this game. I'd probably take the over on it because I feel like he's going to get absolutely peppered in this game. But I don't know. There is also the matchup for those outside corners. If you do get like a man coverage situation, I don't know. We could see something for DK Metcalf. I just find it pretty tough to trust at this point. Final game you want to talk through here: Tampa Bay Buccaneers at Dallas Cowboys.
Oh yeah, I feel like this game is probably our best shot at just a total fantasy shootout, like ridiculous point total. If any game is going to hit, we don't really. I don't think we have a game total this week over 50. But this one has the recipe for a game that hits 60 points, something like that, right? The Bucs just scored 40 against the Chargers, a defense that we kind of respect. The Cowboys put up 30 at Carolina as an underdog. Dallas has won 3 of their last 4. Cooper Rush has been fine. He hasn't had a huge fantasy performance just yet, but he's got 8 touchdown passes over these last 4 games. He's the guy who gets to throw to CeeDee Lamb. That's a pretty good way to make a living. We're facing the Bucs defense, which has been generous to quarterbacks and receivers all year. Tampa, though, man, they got a 4-game win streak. They're the design of that offense, the design of specific plays has been really, really fun all season. Mike Evans looks healthy and it's spectacular recently. Jalen McMillan is going off. Bucky Irving seems healthy enough to go and still be Bucky Irving. So I don't really see a way that Dallas stops this Bucs offense. Baker's been really fun. I mean, I feel like you can play both quarterbacks here, and it's not, we don't have anybody on bye, anything like that. There's no obvious reason to be proactive with Cooper Rush, but Cooper Rush is one of those guys that I think you can plug into a super flex lineup and feel good about it.
What a wild season for Tampa Bay. I've really enjoyed watching the Bucs this year, but week 7 to 10, 4 straight losses. By week 11, 4 straight wins. Obviously, there's an opponent quality to discuss when the 3 of these games on the other side of the bye are Giants, Panthers, Raiders. But still, that was an authoritative win over the Chargers in week 15. And obviously, Mike Evans being back is huge for this. Man, Mike Evans should just go ham in this game. Baker Mayfield said, when asked about Mike Evans' 1,000-yard streak, he said, I'm more aware of it than Mike is aware of it. Let's just put it that way. I don't think Baker Mayfield, I know Mike Evans missed games and it wouldn't be, Baker Mayfield's fault, but I don't think Baker wants to be the quarterback that on his watch, the 1,000-yard streak ends. So I do think Mike Evans gets peppered in this game. I think he can get loose downfield. And it's the fun part of it, and this is the highest over-under of the week according to BetMGM, 48.5 point total in this one. And the only other one I think over 47 is Browns Bengals, which, do they know that Jameis Winston's not playing in that game? Are they aware of that?
I know.
Come on. But so I think this game, not only could it be high scoring, it could be weird too, because this is still Baker Mayfield, who's got some weirdness in him. And it's Cooper Rush on the other side too. So this one could get kind of funky, but there's not very many players in this game, that I think can't be in starting consideration. Obviously, you're not probably going down to the Jalen Tolbert zone, even Jake Ferguson at tight end. I have a Jake Ferguson team that's in the playoffs. I'm thinking about playing Brenton Strange over him.
I get it. Yeah.
Talk about freaking Strange. That's what I'm considering doing. But other than that, I think we know where the ball is going in this one.
Yeah, this is Ferguson is actually an interesting name to bring up for fantasy because again, it's a wasteland of a position unless you got one of the top 3 guys, top 4 guys, and he's healthy now, which is good. He's been, it's not at Trey McBride level, but he's been repelled by the end zone so far this season too. It has been any kind of big year for Ferguson, but generally speaking, in a game like this where it's so easy to imagine a huge point total. I'd be proactive with it. And if I'm deciding between, somebody who's tied to this game and almost anything else, I could lean Ferguson there. I probably, as you say, any of those other supporting receivers in Dallas, it's just too dicey. It's really difficult to pick. But, could I imagine squeezing Jalen McMillan into a deep league lineup? I absolutely could. He's been really good over these last 2 weeks.
Even with some of those throws, Cooper Rush was uncorking last week. I don't know that you're proactively starting him, but I always mention the disgusting Kings Classic League, Andy. I've got Tolbert hanging out on the bench there, and you have to start a bajillion players. So I'm at least wouldn't be shocked if he ends up making that starting lineup because of some injuries. And if George Pickens, the holiday gods don't grant me a miracle here, and I got to start some wacko player in place of George Pickens, Tolbert might get into consideration there. But for the most part, we know where the ball's going on these two teams. Even same analysis you applied to Jake Ferguson could also apply to Cade Otton too. So I think there will be a lot of people, and by a lot of people I mean me, who are weighing Jake Ferguson, Cade Otton, and Brenton Strange all together. So it will be interesting to see kind of how that plays out. I think that obviously the Otton stuff has really run out since Mike Evans has come back, but still, he's out there and he's playing for an offense that's going to score a lot of points. Andy? Appreciate the hell out of you, buddy. This is a hell of an episode. I think we covered a lot of ground here.
I think we did too. I think I found some sneaky ways to talk about a handful of games coming up in that first section. And let's keep the fingers crossed for Trey McBride this week.
For Andy's sake alone, and really for the sake of truly millions of others out there,
but mostly me.
But mostly Andy. Let's keep the fingers crossed. All right. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate you. Next time we hear from you, the dust will have settled on Sunday night. After the break, Tera Roberts joins the show to share her make or break players for this week. We'll get into that right after this. Joining us now, as she does every week, and this is the final week here for Make or Break on the preview show. It is the great Tera Roberts. Tera, what's going on?
I'm sad the season is coming to an end. I mean, it's been a wonderful season, but I always hate to see it come to an end, although, fantasy playoffs are fun. I just love being here with you guys.
Oh, I mean, we have loved having you all year. Hopefully going to have you. I mean, hopefully we will definitely have you on plenty more, once this segment comes to an end, once the season comes to an end, because it's been a blast. You've been a great addition. And I've definitely really enjoyed this particular segment with you every single week, especially because, I mean, let's be honest, Tera, you do like all the hard work for the for this segment. You put the list together and I basically just get to be like, hey, so what do you think? Well, let's go ahead and talk about this player.
I mean, it's fun work. It's fun work because it's not like I'm sitting here having to talk about the easy ones of telling people how wonderful Chase Brown is and you should start him and it's fantastic. Like, that's the easy one, right? Although I think we did probably talk about him earlier in the season.
I was going to say, no, at one point but that's the nice thing is actually eventually once you want to graduate out of make or break, right? Yes. You just want to be mostly making people's lineups when you get to a point that you're just no longer breaking people. So yeah, that's the goal really for these breakout candidates. You want these guys to be in make or break because honestly, Tera, I think if you came in here right now, like how many times did you talk about like Brian Thomas Jr. in this segment all year? And now I think if people, I mean, I would say we need. Hey, you talk about work. Producer Colin, do the work and put together like who are the make or break all stars. No, I'm kidding. Please, Colin, don't do that. You do enough work as well. But yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see like who are the players we talked about most and who are the guys that graduated out of it. Because like, yeah, Brian Thomas, Jerry Jeudy, Chase Brown, those guys are definitely the make or break graduates. So as they put on their cap and gowns, walk across the stage to get their diplomas here in the fantasy football playoffs. Although I don't know, maybe with Dorian Thompson-Robinson under center, maybe he's actually going to be tripping. Jerry might be tripping on his gown on the way to getting his make or break diploma here. Let's talk through your make or break players for Week 16, Tera Roberts, starting with Rams quarterback Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, this is a fun one here because we don't have bye weeks. I mean, it's just kind of we're in the luxury part here where we actually get to look at players out of their abilities and their matchups and not out of desperation. So I feel like this is a fun, nice closing one here. So we get to talk about somebody like Matt Stafford, who we typically don't think as a make or break player, but he's actually, from a fantasy perspective, a pretty boom bust kind of player. In real life quarterback, we would never say that about him because he's Matt Stafford and he's amazing and he comes through and he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback that you can rely on. But in fantasy football, because he doesn't have that wonderful rushing floor and upside, he is a boom bust type of player. To make your fantasy lineups, he needs 300 plus yards through the air and a couple of touchdowns. And if you get an interception or low yardage where he's hovering around low 200 yards and only gets a touchdown, you're looking at a low QB2 performance, unfortunately. So yeah, he's a boom bust player. And there are instances where he finishes even as low as QB30 or worse. Now, looking at Matt Stafford from the last time that we saw him, it was one of those bust games, but I give him an excuse on that because it was that rainy, nasty, messy Thursday night game where everyone looked awful and Cooper Kupp had 0 fantasy points and it was traumatizing and we don't want to think about that one. So we'll move on to happier times here in a matchup in Week 16 with the Jets, which is actually, it's a good matchup. I know we look at the Jets and we often think, we have the wonderful memories of back when Robert Saleh was the head coach and the defense was stout and it was fearsome. But now we've got a Jets defense that is underwhelming and can be exploited. They've allowed strong performances to guys like Mac Jones. fantastic guys like Tua Tagovailoa that can be volatile have taken advantage of this defense. Anthony Richardson, inconsistent Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson. You can attack this Jets defense and have a strong performance here. And when I look at this matchup and why I do really love Matt Stafford this week, I don't just love it because of the defensive matchup. I actually love it because of Aaron Rodgers, ironically enough, because he is on a hot streak here, performing very well at a high level, good high volume back and forth here. I like this game to have a potential solid back and forth here with a good fantasy point total for both of these guys and good real life point totals for both of these teams where we've got a good opportunity for Stafford to have a strong bounce back performance here.
Yeah, I love that you highlighted just this matchup overall because I was actually just writing about it in my preview piece, and I think you can talk about it kind of in both ways. Like, there's definitely the angle that you just took there, which is Aaron Rodgers is playing really good football. I mean, top 5 quarterback play over the last 2 weeks. Small sample, I get it, but it's top 5 quarterback play. EPA per dropback, a number of different metrics you can look at. He's played really well. So you could think like, all right, if the Jets, are able to continue to thrive against this vulnerable secondary that the LA Rams have, that could entice the Rams to really open it up in the passing game. Totally. It is worth noting, though, the Rams receivers as a whole, and obviously this bleeds into the passing attack generally, are much more efficient against zone coverage than man coverage. Like if you look at their yards per route run against zone coverage, Puka is first in the NFL. Tutu Atwell is 7th. Cooper Kupp is 15th. They're all inside the top 15. If you look at man coverage, Puka is, of course, he's berserk. He's second. Him and AJ Brown are the only other receivers above 3.55 yards per route run against man coverage. They're having like elite seasons. But Kupp is 30th. Tutu Atwell's 43rd. And these Jets teams, this Jets defense right now is playing man coverage at the second highest rate on late downs right now. So that's at least a matchup wrinkle like to note. But still, I really do like the game environment here. And if Puka Nacua is still going off against man coverage, I think we can still definitely get a pretty nice Matt Stafford game.
Yeah, and I feel like we got Matt Stafford, and then on a little funnier note there, I feel like this is also a strong incentivized game from Aaron Rodgers. He's currently wants to get out there, prove himself, all the drama that he's got going on, Jets organization going crazy. So yeah, this is I low-key love this game. I like that you pointed out that for Cooper Kupp though, because that's one of the ones that I was kind of on the fence with. Like I'm never on the fence with Puka, but when you're looking at Kupp, even knowing that hey, he's gonna have a bounce back game because 0 fantasy points is just not gonna happen. We do have to look at this and hesitate just a little bit for him on this matchup.
Yeah, it's really interesting to kind of consider there. I love that you just said Aaron Rodgers drama and didn't specify like what you're.
There's too much.
There's too much. He's got his little docuseries out now. There's always drama within the Jets organization. Apparently, they didn't trade for Jerry Jeudy because Woody Johnson's son didn't like his Madden rating. Aaron Rodgers is beefing with like other ESPN personnel. There's always something with the Jets and with Aaron Rodgers. Now, Tara, if I was a better podcast host, which I'm not, I would have thrown right to this Browns player that you have here as we're talking about Jerry Jeudy and Dorian Thompson-Robinson starting. Jerome Ford is another player you want to talk about for make or break.
Yeah, Jerome Ford taking over, unfortunately, for Nick Chubb with the broken foot. Jerome Ford, and this is a weird one because if I'm isolating Jerome Ford as the lead back in this matchup, I'm like, yay, all guns blazing, go ahead. I feel confident in him. He's got all the makeups to have a strong fantasy performance, RB1 upside here. But then when you expand it to everything that is going on in this organization, the fact that we've got the quarterback switch to Dorian Thompson-Robinson and we don't have confidence in him to, even if he, Jameis is chaotic, right? But at the very least, we know that the ball is going to get up and down the field somehow, and there will be goal line opportunities. And that's what Nick Chubb was having. Any success that he had was purely based off of touchdowns. He was not succeeding on the ground. Yardage was a struggle, but the touchdowns really got him there. So I'm worried a little bit if the goal line opportunities disappear there. And, how many checkdowns does DTR have to Jerome Ford as a pass catcher? There's just a lot of variables here. But it's tough to argue against a matchup with Cincinnati's defense, allowing just, especially recently and particularly, allowing good volume and good touchdown opportunities to running backs on the ground. Given that, the matchup here and hoping and just praying that, hey, the fact that we haven't had significant touches from literally any other running back over the past month and a half here. We had the complete phase out of Donta Foreman. Pierre Strong was operating as the third running back and literally not touching the ball other than a couple of times there. So we should get Jerome Ford as the lead back with good volume in a good matchup here to a Cincinnati defense that has particularly been vulnerable to running backs with receiving upside, which Jerome Ford has. So I look at for him here, and I feel comfortable with him as a low-end RB2 and somebody that if you have to turn to because of injuries, I don't think it's the worst option to go with here.
I like that. You could do worse than Jerome Ford. Yeah, he feels very big play dependent too. Like if he can rip off a couple of big runs, then I think he could probably make your fantasy day. And the fact that this is a really good matchup here against this Bengals defense, that breaks the ties in favor of Jerome Ford a little bit for me. Maybe not as much next week, but definitely I think that's it's touchdown or bust, and it's big play or bust, I think, for Jerome Ford. But you could probably do a little bit worse than him. And I imagine they're going to want to put the ball in his hands a lot with DTR under center. You know, when we're talking about like make or break graduation candidates, I 100% should have included Jackson Smith and Jigba, who is in this segment probably a bunch of times and is absolutely graduated. However, during his big stretch here in the second half of the season, DK Metcalf has gone completely quiet. Andy and I talked a little bit about his matchup with the Minnesota Vikings secondary, but I want you to expand on it here and kind of like, where is the line for DK Metcalf, and will we see a big performance from him this week? It does sound, before I throw it to you, it does sound like, at least according to reports I'm seeing right now, that Geno Smith is going to play this week.
Yeah, and that's the positive there. I probably, if we had that unknown at quarterback, I probably would have not included him, but it does feel like we're feeling confident about Geno being in there this week. Now, when we're looking at DK Metcalf, you mentioned the Minnesota matchup here. They're strong defense, but they do allow volume, and it makes it possible for multiple receivers to thrive. The problem with that is that you're working against the Seattle system where multiple receivers, oddly enough, have not thrived. It's been a one-man show over the past month with Jackson Smith and Jigba. They're literally reversing and complete opposite of each other, whereas Jackson Smith and Jigba has been incredibly strong, finishing as a top 30 receiver consistently, hitting double-digit fantasy points, a solid floor, good upside there. DK Metcalf has been the exact opposite. Floor has been terrible, cannot crack the top 30, has only hit double-digit fantasy points one time over this time period after the bye week and his return from injury. You know, it's been rough sledding for him. And the problem is I feel like we're at a changing of the guard, unfortunately, and JSN has just taken over as the wide receiver one there, which wouldn't be a major issue if Geno Smith wasn't suddenly a low volume passer. And I don't know if it's his fault or the function of this offense and how it's, just transitioned with the changing of coaches this year, but Geno has failed to exceed 250 passing yards or throw for multiple touchdowns during this stretch where DK Metcalf has been struggling and taking a backseat. It's the wide receiver too. So it makes sense. It all lines up. It's just straight up a volume problem. JSN has taken over as the wide receiver one, and if there's not enough volume from Geno Smith, DK Metcalf is the one that suffers, unfortunately. But then you get to this matchup and you're like, this one is looking like a potential for some volume here, provided that the weather is good on that one. There's a couple of variables here, but I kind of look at this as a game where DK Metcalf has become a boom bust, make or break type of player. But given the matchup, I feel a little bit more confident that this will lean towards him hitting double-digit fantasy points and be more of a reliable week for him.
Yeah, I just wonder how much he's like still dealing with an injury too. DK Metcalf, he's been on the injury report. He's missed a couple of practices and things like that. I wonder if that's all part of this too. But still, I think I'm with you that I think we've seen a changing of the guard here between these two guys, because DK is a good player, but I think JSN has a more diverse skill set, and one that leans into what this passing game needs more right now, which is like quick outlet throws. Because even if it's not, sack eating Sam Howell, Geno has still been under a ton of pressure this year, and they got to get that ball out quick, and he's just much more decisive, He's just a smarter quarterback than Sam Howell, can identify that pressure coming and can get it out a little bit quicker. So I think that's a big reason, beyond just the fact that he's having a second-year breakout, is part of the reason that JSN is having this season. It does make Metcalf very boom or bust, so I guess maybe that's kind of the key here, Tara, is like, what do people need from the flex spot? Do you need like safe projection? Because I don't think that's what DK is giving you. But if you do need that maybe like high ceiling play and you can live with the low floor, maybe that's the Metcalf play this week. But I know this isn't our talking point here, but I'm curious, what do you think is going to happen with the run game here this week? Because one of the things that I've been like complaining about all year is that this Seahawks run game stinks. And then Kenneth Walker, and I'm not saying this is a Kenneth Walker problem necessarily, but I do think there's some parts of his game that can lead to be a very boom bust as well. As soon as he leaves, Zach Charbonnet comes in. I mean, they have just been running the ball extremely well with Zach Charbonnet. Kenneth Walker at this point is still not practicing this week as of the time of this taping. So what do we think is going to happen with the run game this week? Because that's probably a pretty big key to unlocking like what happens for Seattle on the offensively this week.
Yeah, it is. And I hate that for Kenneth Walker because, I mean, and I guess maybe ideally moving forward when he's healthy, they can get a nice 1-2 punch in here because they really are different running backs. Mm-hmm. The numbers don't lie. I mean, even last week where Charbonnet, from a fantasy perspective, you might look at it and say it was an underwhelming game. And that was, primarily because there wasn't really any receiving upside. But, metrics wise, I mean, he had 6.75 yards per carry, got the rushing touchdown. He wasn't struggling. He just didn't get a lot of carries just because of the game situation there. So, it's weird because earlier in the season, it didn't feel like Kenneth Walker was succeeding from a fantasy perspective, even though he was, just because it was coming in weird ways, and he had an uptick in receiving volume that was really carrying him, and success on the ground in terms of yardage wasn't there, but touchdowns were. So it's kind of like you look at this run game and you don't feel like it's been good. It's been producing from a fantasy perspective, and now Charbonnet has just looked excellent. So I trust it. I trust Zach Charbonnet.
Yeah, I guess we'll just see what happens if they do end up splitting carries, because I feel like having one guy there is actually what allows like a guy like Charbonnet to get into a rhythm. And I do think running the ball would actually help them in this matchup against the Vikings. Another player that we sort of talked about in the first half of the show, just very briefly, and I mentioned to Andy that I have a decision about this particular player, Jake Ferguson. Tara, I am weighing Jake Ferguson versus Brenton Strange off the waiver wire, which makes me feel strange. Ha ha ha! Please clap for me at the joke. But I don't really know. I don't really know what to think about Ferguson, even though I really like this game environment that he's in.
Yeah, game environment for sure is what is carrying him. It's funny. I would not have guessed you guys talked about Jake Ferguson. That would be the last player that I thought. You guys probably thought Jake Ferguson would be the last player on my make or break column too. So, yeah, we'll talk about Brenton Strange in a second here, but Jake Ferguson, coming back from the injury, I was a little bit worried because Schoonmaker did look good in his absence, and given the draft capital, and kind of wondering there, you kind of sat there and paused for a second and thought, maybe that might get to a situation where they are splitting work more evenly, but that's not the case. Ferguson has come back and reclaimed that role. It's clearly his. Unfortunately, it doesn't really matter because the volume is not there to support him being fantasy relevant as the tight end one in Dallas. Since his week 9 game against Atlanta, he hasn't finished inside the top 20 at tight end. And it makes sense because that was the last game with Dak Prescott. Dallas's pass volume has dipped significantly. Now, Cooper Rush, I don't mind what he's doing from a perspective of carrying the offense. As much as admirably as he possibly could and providing volume to CeeDee Lamb. But past that, they're just not pushing aggressively with him. They trust Rico Dowdle. That makes sense that they're leading on the ground game. And without that volume, it's just not giving enough production for Jake Ferguson to be very reliable. He's got this terrible low floor and he doesn't have a fantastic ceiling. He doesn't have that upside of catching multiple touchdowns like a Sam Laporta can pop up and get, like a Mark Andrews can pop up and get. Even though they're going through struggles, there's the reality of which you can put them into a lineup and have a very high upside performance. Right now, we're just not getting that with Jake Ferguson, unfortunately. But then you talk about the matchup and you wonder and you say, ugh, it's Tampa Bay. They are extremely generous to everyone, but especially to tight ends and wide receivers, really. And while I do think that we'll still get a strong performance from Rico Dowdle, this does heavily favor the pass here. And while they haven't pushed significant volume, this is a game where I can see a little bit more flow, a back and forth. I do think Tampa will be able to take advantage of the Dallas defense, even though they've definitely pulled themselves together recently and been stronger here. So I don't mind this matchup if people are looking at him as a streaming upside or streaming option, just because I feel like the floor can be a little bit more reliable and I like the touchdown potential for him in this matchup. Now, Brenton Strange, though, I'm not going to lie, Matt, I do have Brenton Strange ranked higher. And maybe I'm being aggressive on it. Maybe I am. But something about that connection with him and Mac Jones is feeling a little spicy. I don't know if you see the video, like he's getting up and celebrating and he's feeling himself. So
that's Mac Jones for you.
Yeah, it's Mac Jones. So yeah, it's I do like Brenton Strange, even though Ferguson is a safe option, but quite frankly, it seems like Strange is just as safe, but has a potentially higher ceiling as well, oddly enough. So I lean towards Brenton Strange on that one, but I don't know if you can go wrong. I think they're both safe options there.
Well, whichever one I pick will be the one that scores fewer points, but that's like beside the point. Besides the points. So with Strange, yeah, I think you can envision, because we just saw it, like a double-digit target game, especially in a good matchup against the Raiders. Whereas with Ferguson, like I do think he's going to have to make some big plays. He's going to have to score touchdowns because I just don't, like you said, I don't think that volume will be there necessarily for him. Put a pin in this, but you mentioned Schoonmaker. He's just the next in line with like big, kind of relatively built the same way, Big Ten type tight ends that the Cowboys just kind of like have on an assembly line there. Is Dalton Schultz. Okay, he's gone. Now it's Jake Ferguson. When Ferguson's contract is up after 2025, then Schoonmaker will get his little moment too. That's just kind of how this tight end position has worked for Dallas for a minute now in the post Jason Witten era. So Schoonmaker will be back in our lives at some point. Now, you said that you would have think people would have been surprised to see Jake Ferguson in your make or break. I think this last one is more surprising than that, Tera, because I don't think we've talked about a defense and make or break all year, but you want to finish this out with the Colts defense and special teams.
Yeah, this is the first. We have not talked about defenses. I thought it'd be like a fun little Christmas gift for us to finally talk about a defense here. And the Colts were the one that just kept popping out at me as the streaming option of the week here. And the reason why I wanted to point them out is because I feel like it's tough to include defense because I feel like people are definitely more agreeable to being flexible with streaming defenses, giving the matchup. You can look at a Cincinnati defense and say, I don't trust them, but in a good matchup here, I can look at it and say, you know what? I'll raise it up and I'll run with it. But Indianapolis is one of those that I feel like maybe people look at and they hesitate like a tiny bit here because it's viewed as a layup matchup, and they've been inconsistent, especially across positions. They've allowed the 12th most fantasy points to opposing quarterback, the 12th fewest, oddly enough, fantasy points to opposing running backs. They've been attacked by quarterbacks, but not so much through the air. And then the 8th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. And when you kind of match it up with this Tennessee offense and say, okay, when I look at this, I feel confident that Tony Pollard is still going to be very much so in play, and he'll have a successful game and, maybe 100 yards plus on the ground and a touchdown. But from a fantasy perspective, I don't know if that is going to make a massive dent over the potential turnovers there for Mason Rudolph. Ideally, I would have loved if Will Levis was in this spot, but Rudolph is just as turnover prone, maybe not from a pick six perspective the way that Will Levis is, but Rudolph has thrown at least one interception in every game that he has started this season with a total of 5 interceptions. And 4 fumbles, and that's wild considering the fact that he has just 3 starts in 2 partial games here. Yeah, he's more of a turnover machine that you might think. Can he stabilize this offense? For sure. Yeah, probably going to provide a little bit more stability than Will Levis. But at the same time, from a fantasy perspective, this is a good defensive matchup here. And the Colts are a very stream-worthy potential top 12 defense this week. If you want to take a high upside swing against a situation where you could get a pick 6, multiple turnovers here, and thrive from a fantasy perspective.
I like it. Yeah, you're right to point out Mason Rudolph is not like good, I mean, and he's very turnover prone. He is no, he's not even like, let's keep the train on the tracks the rest of the season. I think he's like, let's just play out the string the rest of the season, and then we'll reevaluate quarterback next year in the offseason. That's what's going to happen for the Titans. But yeah, he has just as big of a turnover problem as Will Levis, at least in terms of like, you can count on him throwing you a turnover if you're starting the Colts defense or fumbling the ball or maybe a little bit of both. He just doesn't have them quite in like the Costco bunch that a guy like Will Levis would, and they're not of the like same hilarious fashion. Like Mason Rudolph's turnovers are not like as memeable as Will Levis, but they are certainly just as frequent. So yeah, I mean, finishing out with the defense is a nice way to close out make or break for this season, Tera. But let's finish it as we always do here. Let's toss it to our keys to winning, presented by Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. And your keys to winning this week, here in week 16, it's picking the right players for your flex spot. We need you to get those wins, people. Fantasy playoff semifinals, your path to the championship, it's on the line here. So Tera Roberts, who is your keys to winning player for week 16?
I wanted to take us back to a guy that we have talked about multiple times here. It has been a long time since we have talked about Jauan Jennings. And I get why we haven't. Jennings' production it's been a bit inconsistent and underwhelming, but absolutely none of that has been his fault. He's been in bad circumstances. Brock Purdy struggled with an injury. The 49ers were in that terrible weather game that we mentioned where everyone struggled here. But this week is a beautiful, good weather matchup against a struggling Miami team. And when Brock Purdy is healthy and the conditions are good, Jennings has true top 5 upside. He has taken over clearly as the wide receiver 1 in this offense for Deebo Samuel as he continues to struggle here. This is the perfect bounce back opportunity for Jauan, and Jennings. Feel confident in putting him in your fantasy lineup.
I love it. I got at least one league where I need to play Jauan Jennings, so I'm hoping Tera is right. I've also got my final player here for keys to winning, and this is another player we've talked a lot about, but listen, I think it's important to reaffirm that heading into week 16, Rico Dowdle is a guy that you have to find a way to start this week. We know the matchups have been as good as possible for Rico Dowdle of late. There's no question, but you play who's on the schedule, and he's crushed the Giants. He's crushed the Panthers. He's crushed the Bengals. He's been absolutely crushing. He has an 85% share of the backfield carries the past 4 weeks. He has been just excellent. He's number 2 among running backs the last 4 weeks in rushing yards. He's just been crushing it. And again, the matchups are good, but you play who's on the schedule. This matchup with the Bucs, as we've talked about a lot on this show, this can be a high scoring game. The Bucs run defense is not quite as generous as the pass defense, but still you can run on this team. I mean, Sincere McCormick had like 5 yards per carry against this Bucs team a few weeks ago. So I think Rico's in another good spot here. And just to put a point on this, again, I know people realize that Rico is a fantasy starter, but I think he's a top 10 running back again this week. Like, there are names like Joe Mixon, Jonathan Taylor, James Cook, Bucky Irving, Brian Robinson Jr. Breece Hall. I'm going to have Rico Dowdle ranked ahead of all of those players. So if you got Rico Dowdle on your fantasy roster, unless you're absolutely loaded at the position, I think you got to find a way to make sure he is your flex player at the bare minimum. And with that wraps it up for the Week 16 preview show. Tera Roberts, thank you so much for this show, for all the shows this week. Really enjoyed working with you on the podcast all year long, and I can't wait to have you back on in the future. Tell the people where they can find all your work this week and the next couple of weeks here as we wind down the fantasy season.
you continue to get those fun live start sit shows. Don't miss out on them all across Yahoo's social media platform. And then, of course, go and check out the Make or Break article as well. We'll have Thursday and Tuesday lives, and of course, the Fantasy Football Live as well.
Yes, Tara, this is a big week in Fantasy Football Live lore. Big tie up at the top between me, you, and Andy for our contest. So this is a big one. This is a big one here this week. So definitely make sure you're tuned in the next couple of weeks. If anything, just so we can make sure Fitz doesn't win. Like that's what we need to have out there. All right. Appreciate you, Tara. Appreciate everybody listening, watching the show. We are heading into week 16. We're heading into a big week here. Good luck to all of you and your fantasy teams this week. Thanks again to Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. Next time you hear from us, week 16 Sunday and Saturday. Shoot, both of them are going to be in the books, and Andy Behrens and I will be right here to break it all down. Until then, we are out.